My wife lied about quitting her job, turns out. She was meeting her ex, so I let him pay her bills. After I filed for divorce, I remembered the day she told me about quitting her job like it was a milestone in our lives. She sat across from me at our little kitchen table, sipping coffee, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she described all the ideas she wanted to pursue: creative projects, volunteering, maybe even starting a blog about our travels. I nodded along, genuinely happy, feeling proud that she was chasing her dreams. "I want to focus on us," she said, and for a moment, I believed life couldn't get any better. We spent the evening sketching out plans for our future, trips to Europe, decorating our dream house, and imagining the life we would grow into together. Everything felt perfect. Friends and family couldn't stop complimenting our relationship. Every weekend, people would ask how we kept our bond so strong, how we managed to balance love, careers, and social lives. Even now, I can remember the way Claire's laughter filled rooms, the warmth of her hand in mine during walks, and the way her presence made even the dullest days feel special. In public, she was the charming, fun, ambitious woman everyone admired, but at home, she was my confidant, my safe space. Yet beneath that warm, seemingly perfect exterior, small things started to shift. A text she quickly hid when I walked by. A sudden errand that lasted hours, explained away vaguely as shopping or meeting a friend. Occasional late-night calls where she would retreat to another room, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. I noticed these things, of course, but I convinced myself it was normal. Everyone deserves privacy. I wanted to trust her completely. Looking back, these small, almost imperceptible cracks were the very first warning signs. But in that moment, all I felt was love and trust. I had no idea that the foundation I thought was solid was already beginning to crumble. The stage was set for everything that would come next, and I was completely unaware that the life I was building with her was about to be upended. As weeks passed after Claire quit her job, I began noticing little things that didn't quite add up. She claimed she was busy with personal projects, but often spent hours out of the house with vague explanations. I would ask casually about her day, and she'd smile and shrug, giving short, almost rehearsed answers. At first I told myself it was just the adjustment period. She was finding her new rhythm, exploring ideas, and figuring out how to fill her days. But the uneasy feeling in my chest started growing into something I couldn't ignore. The first real red flag came when a friend casually mentioned seeing Claire at a cafe I hadn't known she visited. She laughed it off when I asked, saying it was just a quick coffee meeting with a colleague. Her phone, once casually placed on the counter, was now always on silent, tucked into her purse, or held close to her chest. Even when I sat beside her, I felt this invisible barrier forming, a secret world I wasn't part of. My gut told me something was off, but I still wanted to trust her. Then came the little inconsistencies: receipts for purchases she never mentioned, appointments that didn't match her stories, and texts she would quickly hide whenever I glanced at her phone. I caught myself analyzing every detail, trying to find logical explanations. Maybe she was just being independent, or maybe she wanted some private space, I reasoned. But with every excuse I made, the feeling of doubt crept deeper. I also noticed a subtle change in her behavior around me. She seemed distracted, sometimes smiling at her phone for no reason, occasionally brushing off my questions with light-hearted jokes that didn't land. Even our friends began noticing a shift. Claire's laughter sounded slightly different, less engaged when I was around. The tension started to seep into our once perfect routines, leaving me anxious and unsettled. By the end of this part, the audience begins to sense the unease and mounting suspicion. The cracks in trust are no longer tiny, they're starting to form a visible pattern. The stage is set for the narrator to start investigating and uncover the first concrete evidence of betrayal. As the weeks went by, the uneasy feeling in my chest only grew stronger. Claire would tell me she was meeting friends or working on projects, but sometimes the stories didn't quite line up. A quick comment from a neighbor about seeing her out, and the first undeniable piece of evidence came one evening when Claire left her phone unattended while making dinner. Out of a mixture of curiosity and growing unease, I glanced at a notification message from someone named James that made my stomach twist. The message wasn't explicit, but the tone was intimate, joking, and oddly familiar, as if they shared inside jokes I wasn't part of. I quickly looked away, telling myself I must be reading too much into it, but a sinking feeling settled in my chest. The next day, small inconsistencies started piling up. Claire claimed she had meetings and errands, but the locations and times didn't match the texts I occasionally glimpsed. I began noticing little habits. She would leave her phone in another room when answering calls, take longer showers, and sometimes return home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize. Even our friends noticed a subtle change in her behavior. They mentioned that Claire seemed distracted, preoccupied, or unusually cheerful at odd times. I started piecing together the puzzle in my head, each small clue a jagged corner of a picture I didn't want to see. I recalled seeing her laugh at her phone late at night, walk out for shopping trips that lasted hours, and occasionally hide texts whenever I approached. It wasn't definitive proof yet, but the pattern was undeniable. The trust I had taken for granted was beginning to feel fragile, and my mind spun with scenarios that grew darker by the hour. I even tried confronting her gently, asking if everything was okay and if she was hiding anything from me. She laughed, dismissing my concern as paranoia, claiming I was overreacting and that I needed to relax. But her deflection only fueled my suspicion. That night, lying awake, I realized that this was no longer about minor secrets or miscommunications. Something was happening behind my back, and I was determined to find out what it was. The moment of truth came one Friday evening. Claire told me she had an important meeting that would run late, and I decided, reluctantly, to follow her. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was just being paranoid, but annoying unease pushed me out the door. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she entered a small, cozy cafe I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I saw her wave and sit across from a man James. At first, they were laughing casually, but as I observed closer, the intimacy became impossible to ignore. He reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. They leaned in close, their heads almost touching as they whispered to each other. Claire, the woman I had trusted completely, was smiling at someone else in a way I had never seen directed at me. My stomach turned, my hands trembled, and a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief hit me all at once. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, watching them interact, replaying all the small signs I had ignored, the hidden messages, the unexplained errands, the late-night calls. Everything I had brushed off as normal suddenly fit into a chilling pattern. My mind reeled. She hadn't quit her job to focus on us or her personal projects. She had been meeting her ex behind my back. I felt utterly betrayed, the foundation of my marriage crumbling in real time. When I finally confronted her that night, trying to stay calm, she laughed nervously and said it was just a friendly catch-up. But I knew the truth. My marriage, the life I thought was secure, was unraveling before my eyes. That evening marked the first major, undeniable betrayal, the moment the story pivoted from suspicion to reality. I sat alone in our living room later that night, replaying the scene in my mind, feeling blindsided, humiliated, and heartbroken. By the end of this part, the audience is fully invested, feeling the narrator's shock and the weight of betrayal, setting the stage for the confrontation and the escalating drama to come in part. 5. The confrontation happened that night. Hours after I had seen her with James, I tried to stay calm, but my voice betrayed the storm inside me. "Claire, who's James?" I asked, carefully, hoping she would give me the truth. She froze for a moment, then laughed nervously, brushing it off as if it were nothing. "He's just an old friend," she said, her tone light, dismissive, like I was overreacting. My chest tightened. I could see through the facade. I pressed further, describing the cafe, the way they were leaning in close, laughing together, the way he touched her hand. She continued to deny it, claiming I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, that she hadn't done anything wrong. But every word rang hollow. Her deflection only fueled my anger, and the weight of betrayal settled heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't a small lie. Anymore, it was a complete fracture in the life we had built together. Our argument escalated quickly. I tried to reason to make her understand the depth of the hurt she had caused, but she countered with accusations of mistrust and paranoia. Friends and family began noticing tension between us in the following days, offering unsolicited advice or awkwardly tiptoeing around the issue. I felt isolated, frustrated, and powerless, unable to comprehend how the person I trusted most could betray me so openly. Lying awake that night, I replayed every memory, every moment of laughter and intimacy, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the one I had just witnessed. The disbelief gnawed at me, mingled with anger and heartbreak. I realized that this confrontation was just the beginning. The emotional fallout had only just started. By the end of this part, the audience is fully immersed in the emotional chaos, the denial, the tension, and the betrayal, setting the stage for the narrator's pivotal decision in Part 6. To separate and take control of his life. After days of sleepless nights and replaying every detail in my mind, I reached a point where I knew I couldn't stay. The trust that had been the foundation of my marriage was shattered, and no amount of explanations or apologies could repair it. Filing for divorce wasn't an easy decision. Had built a life around Claire, imagined a future, and held on to hope that things could be fixed. But the evidence was undeniable, and my gut told me it was time to stop pretending everything was okay. I began taking the legal steps, researching divorce laws, consulting a lawyer, and gathering documentation. Every document I signed, every form I filled out, made it feel real painful but necessary. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers, my hands trembling, thinking about how drastically my life was about to change. The emotional toll was immense. I felt a mix of relief, guilt, and grief all at once. Claire's reaction to my decision was a mixture of surprise and indignation. She accused me of overreacting, claiming I was impulsive and dramatic. She tried to manipulate me emotionally, reminding me of our shared memories, the life we had built, and the plans we had made. But for the first time, I realized that my loyalty to someone who had deceived me could no longer dictate my choices. Filing for divorce became more than a legal act. It was an assertion of control and self-respect. I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was reclaiming my life, setting boundaries, and refusing to be manipulated. It was the midpoint twist of the story. Instead of pleading, begging, or trying to fix things, I took decisive action and chose myself by the end of this part. The audience sees the narrator transforming from a man blindsided by betrayal to someone who is starting to take back control of his life. Tension is maintained as viewers wonder how Claire will react and what consequences will unfold next after filing for divorce. I thought some clarity would follow, but instead, I was hit with the harsh reality of just how deep Claire's deception ran. Even with the divorce papers served, she continued meeting James openly, spending time and energy on someone else, while I was left to deal with the emotional fallout. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a full-scale invasion of the life I had built and trusted her to respect. I began noticing bills I had been covering, payments she had promised to handle, still being left unpaid or manipulated in subtle ways. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest every time I saw them piling up. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was financial. I realized that while I had been blindsided by her lies and infidelity, I was also absorbing the consequences of her choices. I was paying for a life she no longer respected, a reality that made me feel powerless and crushed. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining her laughter with James, replaying every missed sign, every excuse I had accepted, every small red flag I had ignored. The heartbreak merged with frustration, and I couldn't help but feel utterly alone, even in the midst of friends who offered support. This was my rock-bottom moment, the point where despair, betrayal, and financial burden collided. For the first time, I truly understood how manipulative and calculated she had been, and it stung harder than I expected. I felt humiliated, enraged, and deeply wounded all at once. It was the kind of low that made you question everything you had believed about love, trust, and loyalty. But amid the darkness, a sliver of clarity emerged. I realized that the power to reclaim my life was still in my hands. I didn't have to beg, plead, or endure her manipulations any longer. The emotional foundation of revenge or justice was forming in my mind, setting the stage for the next act, turning the tables, and reclaiming control. After hitting that rock-bottom point, I knew I had to do more than just survive emotionally. I needed to regain control of my life and my finances. That's when the idea hit me. If Claire was going to continue seeing James, I could at least make him take responsibility for her lifestyle. It felt cold at first, but every ounce of betrayal she had dealt me justified it. I began researching ways to legally redirect bills and expenses. Ensuring that she couldn't hide behind my goodwill or manipulate me further, I started by separating joint accounts, closing credit cards, and transferring utilities into her name wherever possible. Every move was calculated, precise, and deliberate. I wasn't doing it to punish her out of spite. I was reclaiming what was rightfully mine and drawing firm boundaries. Watching her scramble to manage things she had previously relied on me to cover was both satisfying and empowering. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a sense of calm, like the storm inside me was finally beginning to subside. At the same time, I didn't need to confront Claire directly to prove a point. Letting James pay her bills served as an unspoken message. The lies, the deception, and the manipulations had consequences. It was a quiet form of justice, one that didn't require shouting, fighting, or humiliation. I observed from a distance, taking note of every minor frustration she faced when she realized that the safety net she had taken for granted was gone. This was the turning point. I wasn't a victim anymore, was reclaiming agency over my life, my money, and my emotions. It was liberating to finally feel like I had control in a situation that had left me feeling powerless for so long. For the first time since this betrayal began, I could see a path forward, one where I dictated the terms of my life and refused to be manipulated again by the end of this part. The audience experiences a sense of satisfaction and empowerment alongside the narrator, while tension remains high as they anticipate the fallout from Claire and James. In the weeks following my strategic moves, I watched the fallout unfold, almost like a slow-motion drama. Claire struggled to adjust to managing her bills and responsibilities on her own, and it was hard not to feel a quiet sense of vindication. The ease with which she had previously relied on me was gone, replaced by minor frustrations and moments of panic. I noticed the subtle tension every time she had to pay a bill or make a financial decision without me. Things she had always taken for granted now required effort and attention. Meanwhile, her relationship with James started revealing cracks I hadn't anticipated. He was still covering her expenses, but the charm and lightheartedness I had seen at the cafe seemed to fade as the realities of responsibility set in. Arguments started to emerge, and I watched from a distance as the dynamic shifted. It was a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. I wasn't celebrating her misfortune, but there was undeniable justice in seeing the consequences of her choices land squarely on her. I also noticed how my own life began to stabilize. The emotional weight of betrayal started to lift as I reclaimed my independence, my finances, and my friends and family, who had been cautiously supportive during the chaos, began noticing my calmer demeanor and sense of empowerment. Their reactions reinforced that I had made the right choice, and that while betrayal cuts deep, taking control was the path to healing. At the same time, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Trust, loyalty, and love are powerful, but when abused, they can leave devastation in their wake. Observing Claire's struggle without directly intervening allowed me to maintain moral high ground while ensuring that boundaries were respected. The sense of control, justice, and personal clarity was empowering, and it marked a crucial step toward emotional closure. Just when I thought the situation was settling, Claire tried to pull one final stunt. She reached out, claiming she wanted to talk things through and hinting at reconciliation. At first, I hesitated. Part of me still remembered the woman I had loved and hoped for a resolution. But another, stronger part of me recognized her manipulative patterns. This wasn't a genuine attempt at honesty. It was an attempt to regain control, to blur boundaries, and to test if I would let her back in at the same time. Her relationship with James began revealing cracks I hadn't anticipated. While he had been covering her bills and indulging her, he started noticing inconsistencies in her stories and small manipulations she attempted to pull. I observed from a distance as the tension between them grew, subtle arguments erupting over money, time, and expectations. It was almost ironic. Claire, who had once hidden secrets from me, now faced the reality of being in a relationship where deception could no longer shield her from consequences. The emotional complexity of the situation weighed heavily on me. I felt a mix of vindication and unease. While justice seemed to be quietly unfolding, part of me reflected on the human cost of manipulation. How even those who seem confident and in control can falter when the scales tip. At the same time, I was reminded of my own growth. I had learned to identify lies, enforce boundaries, and prioritize my own well-being. Months after the divorce proceedings began, I finally started to feel a sense of calm. The storm of betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak that had consumed my life was beginning to fade. I spent long nights reflecting on everything the trust I had given, the lies I had uncovered, and the emotional toll of watching someone I loved deceive me. I realized that while the pain was deep, it had also taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and personal agency. I began rebuilding my life, not just in a practical sense, but emotionally. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from during the chaos, started pursuing my passions again, and focused on creating stability and peace for myself. I no longer felt the need to check every detail of Claire's life or wonder what James was doing. My freedom from their manipulation was empowering. In a strange way, observing Claire face the consequences of her own actions allowed me to let go without bitterness. At the same time, I processed the emotional weight of betrayal. I acknowledged the heartbreak, the moments of anger, and the sleepless nights, allowing myself to grieve without guilt. I wrote down my thoughts, confided in friends, and slowly reclaimed the parts of myself that had been lost in the relationship. Each day, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger, and more in control of my own happiness. This period of reflection also helped me understand that empowerment doesn't always come from revenge or confrontation. It comes from reclaiming your life, setting boundaries, and refusing to be manipulated again. I had learned that trust is precious, but self-respect is non-negotiable. By the end of this part, the audience feels the narrator's growth and emotional stabilization. The story is moving toward its final resolution with closure, empowerment, and a satisfying sense of justice. Months after the dust settled, my life finally began to feel like my own again. Claire was now fully responsible for her bills. Her meetings with James had lost their charm, and I no longer felt the weight of her lies pressing down on me. I had reclaimed not just my finances, but my sense of self, my confidence, and my emotional stability. The betrayal that once felt like a permanent scar had transformed into a lesson in resilience, boundaries, and empowerment. Looking back, I realized how much I had learned about trust and deception. I had believed in the sanctity of our marriage, invested my emotions, money, and time wholeheartedly, and yet I had been blindsided. But rather than letting anger define me, I chose to reclaim my life strategically. Every boundary I set, every financial decision I redirected, and every step I took to protect myself was a quiet act of justice, and it worked. Claire faced the consequences of her actions. James saw the reality behind her facade, and I emerged unbroken, stronger than before. I also took the time to reflect on my own growth. I reconnected with hobbies, friends, and personal projects I had neglected during the emotional turmoil. I learned to trust my instincts, value transparency, and prioritize my own well-being. The sense of liberation was profound. I finally understood that empowerment doesn't come from revenge alone, but from reclaiming control over your life and refusing to be manipulated again. By the end, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The story closes on a note of empowerment, justice, and personal victory. A man who survived betrayal, enforced accountability, and rebuilt his life stronger than ever. For the audience, the emotional journey comes full circle: heartbreak, suspense, strategy, and finally, resolution. The tale leaves viewers with a mix of satisfaction, awe, and perhaps a sense of caution about trust, relationships, and personal boundaries.